This is Mark, and this is another Path of Zen podcast. And in this podcast, I want to go over a few issues that I see commonly brought up online in the Buddhist forums, like in Reddit and other places where Buddhists chat with each other. These can be aspiring Buddhists or people who have questions about what Buddhism is. And what I want to talk about is one of the most common questions is about the use of marijuana. And this is kind of a big issue because marijuana is now legal in, I believe, 14 states. It seems to be growing in legalization all over the United States. Many states will have a referendum on the ballot pretty soon here that will legalize marijuana. So there's been a lot of questions about what is the Buddhist position on marijuana. And most of the Buddhists will always point to the fifth precept and the abstaining from the use of intoxicants. Now, a lot of people don't like this because they say that, well, if it wasn't for marijuana, they would have problems. So they're basically claiming that marijuana is a medication. And there is an allowance in Buddhism for the use of medications as long as it is there to cure some sort of illness or disease. And often it has to be under the care of a qualified medical professional or somebody that the Sangha will recognize as qualified to give medical advice. So this issue does fall in two parts. Within the Buddhist law, the use of intoxicants like marijuana is prohibitive unless it's medication, as I have said earlier, to cure some illness or disease. And then the second part is what is allowable by the Sangha itself. Some Sanghas, like the Thai Sangha, which is very strict and adherent to the Buddhist canon, would absolutely prohibit the use of marijuana, even if it was claimed to cure an illness or sickness. And they would say, go find some other cure. However, some other Sanghas, such as the ones in America, may be more permissive. And they would say, well, as long as you have a medical valid reason for using marijuana, then it's okay. So those are the two positions on the use of marijuana. I remember back in the 80s, we, as part with the Portland Zen Center, and we had a Dharma hall that was pretty accessible to everybody to get to. And there were a few people before meditation that would go behind the Dharma hall and smoke a joint. And they would come in smelling just like they had just smoked a bowl of marijuana and come in and meditate and then do their thing and then leave. Well, this went on for a while, and some of the senior students complained to the teacher, which was Kyogen Carlson at the time, that this was happening. And Kyogen's like, yeah, can't really have that. Can't really have people coming in high on marijuana because it is not only is it disruptive, but it also sets a bad precedent as well as allowing immoralities in the Sangha. So he basically went out before the meditation practice and talked to the guys that were smoking the marijuana and basically told them that they are welcome to come to the Dharma Center, but they can't smoke the marijuana behind the Dharma Center. And he kind of gave them the reasonings that there were people complaining of the smell, but it's also not our way to come in all high on some hallucinogenic and then meditate. And the guys actually, they were very kind and they listened to him, and we never saw them again. So the issue came up again about not only drug use in the Sangha, but we had another issue where some new members showed up and they wanted the membership to get involved in a multi-level marketing scheme. And immediately, both the main teacher and the co-teacher, which happened to be his wife, stopped the conversation and told the two people that were kind of advocating for this multi-level marketing scheme that such talk was not welcome inside the Dharma Center, that they would have to cease the talk immediately. And they did. And once again, after our little meeting, they left and we never saw them again. And I approached, because I was a resident at the center at the time, I approached the teachers after that and I said, what was that all about? Why did you shut down that conversation? And the teacher basically said, I have to protect the Sangha. I'm not going to stand here and let other people come in and take advantage of us or, vampire us, taking from us which is not theirs, or just using us. He goes, we have to protect ourselves. We have to stand up and defend our own members and defend, the teachings of the Buddha. And that really got me thinking that what have we let in the door in the past? We as Buddhists look at the precepts as our primary guide. To not kill, to not steal, to not misuse sexuality, to not lie, to not use intoxicants. I think that's 4 of them. So we look to that primarily as things that we cannot do. But how deep do we actually look into these issues that we call the precepts? I mean, let's take a closer look at some of the things that I think that we may need to look at. Like, for an example, when we often talked about in the Zen Center, like, what does Buddha say that we laymen? Because we were all laymen there. We had 2 ex-monks that became the temple's priest, and in Zen, the priest doesn't have to be a monk, and usually they are people that have gone through monastic training to some degree. In our particular case, the 2 teachers had gone through monastic training, I believe, 15 to 20 years prior to becoming the Zen Center's head teachers. And but they were laymen, if it really came down to it. They were Zen priests, which is sort of a you're a layman, but you're also the head of the Sangha, the local Sangha. And they would claim they're monks, but they don't follow the Vinaya, and they can drink alcohol, and they're married and have sex with each other, and pretty much do things that no actual Zen monk would do, because Zen monks, when you're in a monastery, actually follow the Chinese Vinaya. And that's something that a lot of Zen Buddhists don't really know or don't get, because it's actually quite uncommon to be dealing with a real Zen monk, and it's not really something that Western Zen is set up for. We're more of a lay organization with laymen, and you can have lay priests, people that have gone through some small amount of Zen training or monastic training, and have been authorized to teach by the Sangha or by the Sangha's founder. Some of these Sanghas are just missionaries or satellite temples of other bigger Sanghas. So that's pretty much what when we talk about Zen priests, that's pretty much what I'm talking about. However, when we talk about defending the Dharma and what we can and cannot do, as laymen. These are so some of the businesses that were pretty much prohibited by the Buddha for laymen would be the business in weapons. That would be the manufacturing, the selling, repairing of pretty much anything to do with weapons and weaponry. And a lot of people will say, "Well, hey, I'm a conservative Buddhist. I own a gun for self-protection." What does that mean? And we would say, well, are you, if you're making that a business, that would be prohibited, but owning a weapon is not prohibited. So, and then neither would be going out and just, practice shooting. That would not be prohibited either. Another one is in the business of human beings. And sometimes people also might translate this also as the business of living beings. But basically we're talking about some sort of slavery, and of where you're dealing with humans or other sentient beings in the capturing or the controlling their movements or controlling their labor. So obviously, slavery, which has been illegal pretty much all through the world, except in some cases in the Middle East and Africa where it's still being done, has been eradicated. But we're also talking about, believe it or not, the issue of like a prison guard or a police officer has come up at times. And in some cases, this can be a prohibitive profession to engage in, according to the Buddha, because you are detaining, you're controlling people. So this is a very interesting issue about to what extent does this business in human beings, slavery or the control of, extent to. Again, it would be up to the Sangha leaders to really, decide whether or not they would have somebody who was a police officer or a prison guard in the Sangha or not. So another prohibitive profession would be the business of meats. And mostly those that would work in a slaughterhouse, actually doing the killing of the animals or the skinning of them, therefore. Things like, a butcher has come up. And these were issues of, well, so you're telling me that, I can't be a Buddhist because I'm a butcher, or that's my livelihood. Again, that's up to the Sangha and the Sangha leaders and how they will proceed with that. The other one would be the business of intoxicants, which would be anything to do like with marijuana, alcohol, any sort of mind-altering drugs. So, like being a drug dealer would be, you couldn't be in the Sangha. But what about being a bartender? Or what about being a cocktail waitress? This is a very interesting question. And has been debated before in the Sanghas, and this is something that I don't think anybody has really made any definitive answer on. However, according to Buddhist law, being a bartender or a cocktail waitress would be a profession that you were not allowed to engage in. And this is a touchy issue because we're dealing in a culture where intoxicants and as in an intoxicating beverage is prevalent. So, and the last one is in the business of poisons. And there's a lot of times people will say, oh, so that means I can't be an exterminator. And, well, yeah, that's basically what it says. But it also could deal with other things that could be determined to be a poison or a toxic chemical. So, also, like I said, as Buddhists, we look to the 5 precepts. No murder, no thieving, no prostitution, no lying, and no narcotics. So, what does this really mean? We've also brought this up many times in our Sangha discussions. And yeah, Sanghas do talk to each other. We just have a Sangha discussion night where the members of the Sangha speak their heart, it doesn't mean that what they say is an absolute, and it doesn't mean what they say has to be. A lot of times people would bring up questions or concerns or issues within the Sangha. And a lot of times this can be issues that elders would observe going on, or these would be issues or questions that novices and newbies would who just joined the Sangha might bring up. But it was also sort of a way to learn the ways of the Sangha. So one of the things that I try to tell people is that the Sangha, the true Buddhist Sangha, even the Zen Sangha, is not a anything goes, and it's definitely not a big tent. There are rules and there are requirements, not only to join the Sangha, but also to remain in the Sangha. And, people say, well, gee, that's just like the Mennonites or the Seventh-day Adventist or the Jehovah's Witnesses. You're saying you're just like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, we are just like that. That's Buddhism. And this kind of becomes a big, people open their eyes like, what are you talking about? I thought you guys accepted everybody. And it's like, you kind of misunderstood. Anybody and everybody can listen to the Dharma, and anybody and everybody can study the words of the Buddha. That is not restrictive. Though to actually be in the Sangha is restrictive, and to actually remain in the Sangha, there is a code of conduct and morality to follow. And this brings up a lot of intense emotional debates, as you can obviously tell. And it also brings up a lot of heated arguments as to, are you then telling me that so-and-so can't be a Buddhist because they're a bartender? This is where it goes. So let's even go further and look at, well, what's the point of being in the Buddhist Sangha to begin with? What's the point of even being a Buddhist if there's going to be no rules and no morality and anything goes? And then at that point, it's just a meaningless thing. You might as well just not even have it. And so you can see where these discussions end up at. A lot of times they end up with people actually walking out the doormat and slamming it, and we don't see them again. So this is a question that I also bring up to you, the dear listener, as what is it that makes a person a Buddhist? I mean, we are all here to listen and understand and practice the teachings of the Buddha. And we pretty much understand that to be a path of liberation from this putrid suffering, from this cycle of rebirth, from this samsaric life, as people would say, that we live in. And we also know this is about living a good life, wholesome and moral, to build up karma so that in future rebirths, if we fail to escape rebirth this time, that we have a better fortunate and better rebirth to study the Dharma in future rebirths. But what's the point of doing this when we as a Sangha say, well, there's no rules, there's no morality, anything goes. You could be a murderer, you could be a bank robber, you can be a prostitute, you can be a drug dealer, you can be an assassin, and still be a Buddha. We'll still take you in. We'll still call you a Buddhist. This becomes a very almost desperate issue when that kind of things are said. And people would say, oh, well, we're a big tent. We got to have everybody. I mean, it helps everybody. Everybody has good merit if they're ordained in the Sangha, even if they are disqualified. And it's like, no, that's not really how it works. When you go against Buddha's teachings by allowing people into the Sangha who are clearly not qualified to be in the Sangha, you create negative merit, and you send everybody to hell. And those are teachers that generally don't understand Buddhism, or they want Buddhism to be something else, or they're just desperate for the membership because they need the money. And I think more of the latter is what's happening, especially in today's Sanghas. So, I left Buddhism. I just completely dropped out of the whole thing like 17 years ago. And just within the last year and a half, kind of got re-engaged back into what's going on. And I reached out and I've talked to a few people. I'm going, so hey, tell me about your experience at the Zen Center. And they come back and they say, well, let me tell you what's going on. He goes, I go to the meditations and they meditate. And they bow at the Buddha statue, and that's about as far as Buddhism goes. He goes, and then we go down for the little talk, and not a single word about Buddha or the teachings of the Buddha is even mentioned. All that they talk about is current political situations and climate change. And I'm like, oh, okay, so are they bringing in any sort of, teachings of Zen or what the point of Zen is? And they're like going, nope, all they want to do is talk about being an activist, being a champion for the perceived minorities of others, and climate change. And I said, wow, that does not really sound like a Buddhist Sangha. I mean, in Buddhist Sangha, people talk about their practice and about Buddhist laws and about the sutras, and they're like, nope, they don't even mention it. And I said, well, how long have you been going to this place? And they go, for about a year and a half. I'm going, you're going regularly? They go, yep, I go every weekend. And I go, and they don't talk about any of the stuff at all. He goes, nope. He goes, in fact, some people have become so anti-Buddhist that they won't even mention the Buddhist names or the sutras or anything. And I'm like, wow. And I said, this really sounds very strange. I need to check into this. So I did. I started checking around. I'm going, what's going on with this? And I'm finding out that I'm going, oh, well, there's these people that, they basically had a divorce with Buddhism. So they decided what Zen is, and they decided what Zen means all by themselves. And they had a little divorce with Buddha and went on to start their own thing. And I'm like, really? Like who? And they're like, oh, well, Charlotte Joko Beck and Tony Packard. These are two prime examples of people who have renounced their lineages and Buddhism and went off and started their own thing. So I go and look up what it is that they are doing. And sure enough, they really are teaching their own thing, which is not Zen and not Buddhism, but yet they are using Zen and Buddhism in the way that they talk and in their promotion as marketing terms. So I'm like, oh, well, now I see the problem. And we have a problem here of people who are using these buzzwords, Buddha and Zen, to gain an audience when in fact they teach nothing of that sort. And I'm like, so what is the Buddhist community at large doing about this? Nothing. Zero, nothing. They just sort of turn their head and pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm like, so, but you go to the bookstore and you go to the Buddhist section and their books are just lining and littering all over the bookshelves. And they're like, yeah, well, the bookstore's in the business of selling books. Oh, I see. That's what it is. So this is just becoming a for-profit organization and screw the Buddha. And they're like, yep, that's pretty much it. And Zen is anything that people want Zen to be. Oh, I see. So that's where we're at. And that's why we are in these current environments where we have young men and women saying, well, hey, I can smoke dope. That's Buddhist. You can't tell me I can't be a Buddhist and I can't smoke dope. The other ones I've been hearing is, well, I'm a sex worker and I'm a Buddhist, and you can't tell me that I can't be a Buddhist. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not the one telling you these things. This is the Buddha speaking. You can certainly decide that you don't want to be a Buddhist by your actions and deeds, which is what you're doing. But, you cannot, ask me to call you a Buddhist. And they're like, well, I'm not asking you to call me a Buddhist. And I'm like, well, I'm just letting you know that you're kind of going to be off on your own, and not very many people are going to agree with your views. Like, I don't care. I'm gonna have my practice anyway. Well, okay, that's fine. And what can you say? All I can say is, I personally cannot, call you a Sangha member. That would be immoral. Somebody who is obviously, flagrantly transgressing the precepts. And I do point out that things like sodomy is in the not only the Buddhist canon, but it's well recognized all throughout Buddhism as a inappropriate sexual conduct. And people get real mad at this. Well, no, it's not. It's legal. I'm like, it's just because secular law may legalize it or simply not enforce it doesn't mean that suddenly the Buddha's law is null and void. Buddha's law is Buddha's law, and you're basically deciding upon yourself what is and isn't Buddha's law, or to conveniently ignore certain parts of the Buddhist law that you don't agree with. This again, as you can see, the arguments and the stomping and the beating of the chest and the door slammings as people tell you to go fuck off and die happen. And I try to tell people, well, hey, look, the Buddha's a tough guy, and he's not telling us these things, just because, he's got some puritanical streak up his ass. But what it really is that he's trying to get us to transcend these worldly ways. And we do that through abandonment and relinquishment. And yet, if we still cling to any, identification, I'm a carpenter, I'm a police officer, I'm a janitor, or I'm gay, or I'm heterosexual, anything like that. This tends to create the self, and the self creates suffering, and the suffering creates the cycle of rebirth. This is basically what Buddha is trying to say to us, which is relinquish that stuff. And that is the poisons of your mind. And when you relinquish that and abandon it, you will have freedom. But we don't. And it seems now that Zen is all about creating these identities. Oh, we're going to be climate warriors, and we're going to be social justice warriors. We're going to go out there and fight against all of these injustices and all of these historical problems that people have faced throughout all of history. And we're going to be an activist Sangha, and we're going to do these things, and we're going to be righteous. And I just look at that as, oh my goodness, that is so stinky. All you're doing is creating more suffering identity, more of the putrid self, and all you're doing is creating more attachment. It's like they're like, well, what would you do? And I would say, relinquish all of it, let it go. That is not the path of Buddha. The path of Buddha is to detach from this, to transcend, to lessen the suffering in this world by becoming Buddha. And of course, you get the big eye staring back at you like you're freaking crazy. And they tell you, well, I don't know what kind of Buddhism you practice, but that's not my Buddhism. And you just look at them as like, yeah, well, you live in a delusional Buddhism, which is not Buddhism, and you are transgressing the precepts left and right, up and down. And unfortunately, I'm just not going to be here much longer in your company. And that was pretty much where I'm showing the door, once again, showing the door. This happens a lot, actually. And then I get, people, like, oh, I heard that conversation, and, I really agree with what you're saying, and, wow, I just never heard anybody say it like that, especially to her, because, she's the self-appointed leader of us. I'm like going, well, It says, you have a weak practice. You have a weak Buddhism. This is something that you know is true, but yet you'll say nothing because you're weak. It says, why don't you grow a pair? Get out of the shadow of these people. These people are not helping you. If anything, they're harming you. And they're like, yeah, I need to do that. I need to really think about what you're saying. And then they go walking off, and that's pretty much the last I'll see of them too. It becomes difficult to stand up for what is right, especially when, as soon as somebody like me says, hey, this is what you're saying is not Zen and it's not Buddhism, and then they see that, oh, well, this guy, we got to show him the door, get him out of here. He's actually speaking the B word, Buddhism. I can't have that. Bye. They see that. And they're like, ooh, okay, so if you actually speak and defend Buddhism in this Sangha, you're out the door. Check. Let's not do that, they say to themselves. Let's completely just go with the flow, and we'll get the tea and cookies at the end, because after all, they want to be Buddhist. They want to have the camaraderie. They want to be in the club. And if the club is, we're going to be social justice warriors and march for the BLM nights and promote gay relationships, then that's what they're going to do. And they're going to do it and call themselves Buddhists, despite the fact that they're not Buddhist, despite the fact that they are shitting on the face of Buddhism, that they are defiling Buddhism. They will do this. And then we get to the Zen centers, and they will say, well, we're not Buddhist. That was a jet flying over, by the way. We're not Buddhist. We're just Zen. We're a Zen center. But the Buddhist thing is optional. We have some people here that are Buddhists. I couldn't point to them, but they're here somewhere, maybe. And you're like, so you're Zen, and so what is Zen? Well, Zen is being compassionate and nice, and helping all sentient beings. I'm like going, that doesn't really sound like Zen. I mean, Zen is the intuitive knowing of ultimate reality. And Zen is also a methodology of bringing people to this knowing, because it's not something that can be directly taught. And once again, they look at you like, what? What did you say? I'm going, well, we're talking Zen, aren't we? I'm like, well, I don't know what Zen you're talking about. We're talking about, the Zen of helping people and fighting for the oppressed, and, making sure that we all live in a good environment. That's what we're talking about. I'm like, hey, you're not talking about Zen. You're just talking about political activity. You're not a religion here. You're a political action group. And they look at me like, oh, who are you? Get the hell out of here. We don't need you. And these are what I've kind of run across here within the last year and a half. And, it's one of these questions of what happened. I mean, you can't have this kind of weak Buddhism in the Dharma centers and expect to have any spiritual progress. I talk to the students and I say, well, how's your meditation? How's your progression? And they're not making any. Zero. None. And I'm like, okay, how is, what's going on here? Why is it that you're stopped? What's being stuck on? Like, well, I don't know. I do the meditations, I do this, I do the political work, I do the activities, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I'm not growing. Nothing's happening. And they just feel that they've made no progress from the day they started. And so, and I point out, well, it's probably not the fact that you're doing anything wrong. It's just that your practice is very weak. And I point out that they're probably still engaged in unwholesome activities and probably still allowing a lot of immoralities to permeate their lives. And they're like, well, yeah, maybe, I just need to really work on that. I'm like, well, I think you probably need to find a different Sangha as well. And this person that is calling themselves the teacher, I think they need to step down and, or maybe when all their students leave, maybe they'll get the message that they're not all that. And they're like, well, yeah, this person became teacher because we didn't have anybody else, and they read a book or two. And like, yes, I understand how it goes sometimes. And sometimes people who are not qualified, or sometimes people who are just have significant problems, kind of end up in charge. And that happens. So I kind of tell people, I said, look, it doesn't mean you have to quit the Sangha, but you can stand up for yourself. It's like, oh, if I do that, I'll be kicked out. And I said, if they kick you out, you'll know you're right. Because if they cannot stand up to the light of the Buddha's teachings, then they're not Buddhist. And then you don't need them. And, move on. I mean, it's just that simple. You can't save them. If they are deciding that Buddhism is something that it's not, and that Zen is something that it's not, and they won't listen to reason or logic or even the words of the Buddha, then you're done. There's nowhere to go with that. And many of these people are like, yeah, you're right. And a lot of them have quit. They've quit their Sanghas because they've tried. They went and spoke their piece, and that was the end. They were basically told to sit down and shut up. And that's how it's been lately. So I've really been wondering what is going on in the Buddhist Sanghas. I try to follow some of these popular Zen teachers. This guy Mito Roshi in Michigan or Wisconsin. I'm very, very confused on who this guy is. I've looked up his history. He's definitely a spiritual adventurer, has gone from many different religions and many different teachers. And then suddenly he makes these claims that he's from this very, Rinzai tradition. And I'm looking at this like none of this even looks right. None of this even smells right. So I listened to a few of this guy's Dharma talks, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. Nothing but Zen stink and convoluted teachings, mixing up yoga, mixing up Hinduism, mixing up all kinds of non-Buddhist traditions and calling them Buddhist. And very much pounding in the fact that you have to have a teacher-disciple relationship, that is what the holy transmission outside the scriptures mean. And I'm just like, oh my God. This guy is a cult leader, A class 1. Definitely, trying to amass people around him because they think, and he wants them to think that he has something that he can give them. And people are going to fall for that. That's just how cults work. And I'm like, wow, if we have fallen that low as Zen students and as a Sangha to let that sort of shenanigans go on, we've got some serious problems. And if we can't fix this, then Zen is going to die. We as the experiment of Zen in the West will be over, as we will fall victim to con men and the various schemes that will be launched upon what is left of the Sangha to tear it apart for the enrichments and enjoyments of deviant people. So I've been kind of preaching the last year and a half more of a sensical and more down-to-earth approach to Zen and to Buddhism. And, I get a few comments, kind words, thank yous. But overall, it's been very silent out there. And there's not very many people that are responding back to much of anything I have to say or I have put up. And I'm getting views. The channel's getting 40 to 60 views a day. And, we've got a slowly but consistently growing subscribership. And, I look at my website. The website traffic is like 1 or 2 people a week who visit, and that's about it. All the other channels I have is just very sparse traffic. And I realize that if we have let Zen and Buddhism fall to the point of people are just turning their back to it. People don't think anything of it. People have, or maybe it's just so pedestrian and so lost in the marketing schemes and the scams that are going on that then it's over. And then people are, and then we're done. This is it. Goodbye. And people are telling me like, oh no, we got to create a new religion, a new path. We got to take all the core value of Zen and report it into something else. And I'm like, well, that's a Herculean task. That is not something that a nobody like me can do. I mean, I talked to a Japanese priest in Japan, a guy that's gone through all the Zen training there, and he's got the Shiho, and he's a Daiyosho, and he's like, oh no, you got to become somebody. You got to change it from the inside. You got to go all the way through, and then once you kind of become the head honcho, you can make the change. And I'm like going, well, so maybe that's how it works in Japan, but here in America, there really is no Sotoshu. There really is no head authority. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a problem. And I pointed out that how do you change the corruption that's in a system other than completely dynamiting the system and starting over again? And the one way is to speak to you like how I'm speaking to you now, to just talk about the corruption and talk about the insanity that is going on within the Zen centers, and to point out that we have lost our way, and that we have weak Buddhist practices, which is what I see and I have talked to a lot of monks from all over the world, including Thai monks and Vajrayana monks and other Zen monks, and they all agree that it's a weak practices, it's a weak devotion, it's a weak commitment to the path, that we are not encouraging these things, and we have so weak of a practice that we allow for any distractions to just take us away. And we allow for anybody's errant mission to supersede what our mission really should be. And that when these things happen, it is a sure sign. It is a call in the dark for help, for us as Zen Buddhists to wake up and retake back our Zen centers, retake back the teachings. And yeah, I know a lot of people, may be listening to this and saying, well, my teacher kind of is like that. They're weak. And what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go against the teacher? And the answer to that is, yeah, you are. If the teacher has advocated their position as a Buddhist and has advocated their position as the caretaker of the Sangha, they need to be called out for it. And I know that people will accuse, well, you're slandering the Sangha, you're slandering the Dharma. No, you're not. By sitting by and saying nothing when people are trying to tell you something that the Buddha didn't say, or trying to tell you something that Zen or Buddhism is when it's clearly not, you are slandering the Dharma by allowing it. I've seen people walk out of Zen centers and never come back, and their disagreement of allowing people who engage in sexual deviancy to be ordained into the Sangha. People have stood up, and it may take the walking out of the members in the senior membership saying, I no longer can be a part of this, and the teacher being left alone. Just because you leave a Sangha doesn't mean you're leaving Buddhism, doesn't mean you're leaving the Dharma. A Sangha can grow corrupt. A Sangha can grow away from the Buddha and the Dharma. It has happened. And how do you replace a teacher? Oh, how do we do that? We can't do that. Yes, you can. You simply, as the Sangha, speak up as a one voice, and you tell the teacher, you're dismissed. Bye. And I know that that's hard to do. I know a lot of people just would be, they would hear this and they would be shocked, but that is how it is done. And if you're a teacher, listening to this and you're thinking, oh, this guy, he's completely lost, he's deluded, he's got some sort of white supremacist, ultra-conservative Buddhist thing going on. It's like, no, not really. It is true Buddhism, and it is also true Zen, whether or not you like it. And I know a lot of these teachers have kind of created their own Zen and their own Buddhism outside of the scriptures, and they sort of got lost in these things. They sort of got lost in their own imaginations. And that's what they teach, and that's what they believe. And there's really no talking them down from it because they think they're enlightened. Yeah. A lot of these teachers, they, after a certain amount of time as a practitioner, or a certain amount of time in a monastery, or a certain amount of time being with a lineage, as they would call it, which is a school, and they gain a certain rank within the organization. A lot of people, they gain the soul claimed Dharma transmission. They think they're enlightened, and they think their shit doesn't stink. And if this is you, and you're one of these people who thinks their shit doesn't stink, you think you're enlightened, even though you probably would never tell anybody that, but you think it anyway, you really need to check yourself. You need to check what comes out of your mouth, because I'm going to guarantee you probably a lot of the things that you have said as Buddhism isn't so. And that's my podcast for today. I know it's a little bit hard-hitting and a little bit on the rough side, but there's been a lot of things I have been looking at and seeing within the Zen and the Dharma communities lately, and it's really been bothering me, and especially the incredibly weak Zen practices that people have. You're gonna go nowhere with those things, guys. You gotta really look at this stuff and take it seriously for there to be any progression. All right, thank you, and hopefully you'll come back next time and we'll have something different to say.